Hello and welcome to a special edition of Culture on I-24 News. Today, as you can see, we left our studios for Jerusalem, and we're here at the Israel Museum, which is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. We'll talk to the museum's director and to the curator of one of the special anniversary exhibitions, and also take a look at some of the more iconic features of the museum. So, let's get started. On this 50th anniversary, the museum decided to undertake the humble task of creating an exhibition that sums up the entire history of the human race. Uri Shapira has more.
Hundreds of thousands of years of man's evolution are summed up at the Israel Museum in a special exhibition inspired by Professor Yuval Noah Harari's book, Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind.
What we are doing is actually trying to identify some seminal objects, important objects, that when you are looking at them and you are examining them, they are telling you the story of humankind. These objects are put in kind of a context where they are dialoguing with contemporary art.
Some of the items on display reveal the roots of civilization, the first evidence of communal fire, or the first evidence of writing, and the world's oldest complete sequel. At the center of attention, the oldest known copy of the Ten Commandments, a 2,000-year-old scroll found at the Dead Sea. What is interesting in this display is the way it links past and present, cause and effect. For example, this exhibit of Albert Einstein's original manuscript of the theory of relativity, and just above it, video art documenting an atomic bomb test on Bikini Island.
There is a kind of a notion of the fact that humankind is always in a kind of a tension towards the nature, and most of the time doesn't know how to respect the nature.
I'm very happy to have with me James Snyder, the director of the Israel Museum for the last 18 years. Hi, James. Thanks for taking the time speaking to us.
My pleasure.
So, some of the special events that are taking place for this 50th anniversary, what are you most proud of? What are you most happy about?
Well, I'd say two things. First of all, there's not one event. There are events throughout the year, and there are exhibitions throughout the year. And we're a little bit proud of that because often institutions that are celebrating a milestone pick one moment. And we felt that we should celebrate throughout the year. And the second thing is that the core of what we're doing for this year is really a program of exhibitions that tell a story. Because we felt that we are always, and first and foremost, about content, and that we wanted to do a series of shows that would give a narrative, not just for what the year is about, but for what the museum's first 50 years have been about.
Right. What do you see as the museum's role within the museums in Israel, within the art world in Israel?
I think the museum actually has a couple of roles, and they all stem from the point that the museum is in Jerusalem. And Jerusalem is a kind of place that has hugely deep meaning for Israel, for the state of Israel. But it has an historical meaning here for the ancient land of Israel, but really also for the forming of the history of civilization worldwide.
Yeah. So you don't see it necessarily as an especially Jewish museum?
Well, actually, it's not in any respect a Jewish museum. It's a museum which is about material culture. We're a universal museum. Our collections begin with objects 1.5 million years old, come up to the present. We address the material culture of communities all over the world. And what gives special meaning to the breadth of what we do and to the length of time that we cover through our collections is that it speaks from Jerusalem, but to the whole world.
Yeah. Right. And obviously you compete with some major institutions around the world, if it's for contributions or artworks. What sets the Israel Museum apart?
what sets this museum apart from all others, first of all, is the breadth and the scope of what it is about. And secondly, that it sits on the top of a hill in a very impressive setting in Jerusalem, which is at the center of the universe. You know, if you go back through history, Jerusalem simply happens to find itself at the land bridge connecting Europe, Asia, and Africa. So if you wanted to think over time about a place which would be appropriate for a museum whose collections really are as broad in scope as ours, Jerusalem is that perfect place. So in a way, we stand apart for that reason. And because, in a way, we're at the center of the universe, but very far from most of our sister institutions worldwide,
right,
what it means is that it's extremely important for us to be connected to all those institutions. So we're connected worldwide in two ways. One is a support base that reaches all over the world. And the second, and we're really very proud of this, is a very strong set of ties to the very kinds of institutions that Teddy Kollek wanted this museum to be like when he founded it.
I think Teddy would be proud. James, once again, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you, and a pleasure to talk to you.
Standing here in front of the Shrine of the Book, one of the most iconic buildings of the Israel Museum. Housed inside this unique dome are the Dead Sea Scrolls. David Gombin has the story.
We are at Qumran on the heights of the Dead Sea. It was here that in 1947, a Bedouin shepherd named Muhammad Hassan Edib lost one of his animals. And while searching, he entered an isolated cave. Inside, he found some large jars. He was far from suspecting that this was the source of one of the greatest archaeological discoveries of his time. In these containers, wrapped in cloth, were leather scrolls, some dating back to the 3rd century BC, and they were extremely well preserved. And that's just the beginning. Until 1956, dozens of caves were found and searched, and 11 of them had hundreds of scrolls. A huge treasure that has been increased to 850 scrolls and 15,000 fragments, mostly in Hebrew, but also in Aramaic and Greek. This is the oldest biblical text in Hebrew known to date. The fabulous Book of Isaiah, written in the 2nd century BC, 54 columns of 17 calligraphic sheets of leather, stitched to each other, approximately 7 meters long. In 1947, when first discovered, Qumran was in the Transjordan territory, Jordan today. They continue to claim the treasure, so far in vain. Israel has declared these manuscripts as part of the Jewish heritage, and since 1965, some extracts are on display in the brand new Shrine of the Book of the Israel Museum. It took the scrolls a few years to be decrypted, but decades to be published. But fortunately, a collaboration between Google and the museum was able to scan all the manuscripts, which are now available online. So go ahead and grab your magnifying glass.
The Israel Museum was opened in 1965. That year is also the focus of an exhibition presenting artifacts and artworks from that year. With me is the exhibition's head curator, Mira Lapidot. Thanks for taking the time to speak to us.
Thank you for having me.
So, besides the novel notion of the year that the museum opened with, what was significant about 1965?
Well, in many ways, the answer is a negative one. I mean, it's not an important year, and the choice of it was primarily, I mean, in many ways, arbitrary. It's really looking back at the year that the museum opened, and we sort of went in kind of reverse engineering. So it's not an important year historically. It's, I mean, if you would take important years in Israeli history, it would be 48 or 67. And in terms of art, you know, at the end of the 60s was an important moment. So after 73 was an important moment. So this was a kind of non-year. But what you discover when you sort of dig deeper is that there are many interesting things.
So what did you find? Who were the prominent figures in 1965? What movements were important?
So it was very much a kind of gelling time. It was a time between styles, between major schools in Israeli art. And we knew of some important figures that began that year or sort of rose into prominence that year, like Yigal Tumarkin. But we really looked in all directions. And we looked also to find artists whom were significant at that time and maybe not anymore, and to try and understand why and how history judges art. So it also has bearing on our activity as an institution that keeps presenting contemporary art and keeps collecting and buying contemporary art, because we think we know something about the art around us, and then history judges a little bit differently. So it was a kind of humbling experience also to see how good judges are we of our own time.
Right, in real time. I'm sure that finding the works for this exhibition was very different than from curating any other kind of exhibition.
Right.
What caught you? What surprised you while working on it?
Well, first of all, I worked on this exhibition with a team of 4 other curators, and none of us was born. I mean, we all were born after '65. Now, this is not to attest to our age, but just to say that in many ways we weren't witnesses to that particular year.
Right.
So we had to validate our perception in a very sort of methodical way.
It's very easy to become nostalgic and kind
and we
of...
really wanted to avoid that point of view. So first of all, we searched our own collection,
right,
and we looked for works that were signed and dated 1965. And we came up with a certain collection, and then we approached other main museums and collections in Israel, including private collections, and asked them, what do you have signed and dated from 1965, which is an odd request. So they all started looking and came up with many interesting works. So for instance, to give an example, in some cases we found works by artists who are today very well established and well known, like Micha Ullman. And we found an early print of his from '65. It was after he studied in London, a figurative of a kind of a sculpture of a woman, something that you can see some of the things that would later be, sort of part of his signature
his
style.
Trademark.
Yes, but something sort of a moment before he started working in a certain path. So this was one example. And then for another type of discovery was artists. There's one artist here whom we really didn't recognize the name. We found the recurring name of Yosef Halevi. And we didn't even have a vague idea who's the guy and what did he produce. And then we reached out and we found his widow and his daughter, and we discovered an interesting artist, and we also discovered why he sort of tipped off the art history wagon of Israeli art. He immigrated to Holland, to Amsterdam in '73. And didn't keep his ties here. So it's also, again, if we're going back to our times, to think, what keeps artists in the sort of public awareness, and where sometimes someone fades away is also an important point.
Maybe it's never too late. You can come back
true.
50 years later
This is the
in
point
a special
of,
exhibition.
Mira,
thanks so much, Esther.
Thank you.
Here at the heart of the land of the Bible, the Book of Books is not to be trifled with. It exists in many editions in many languages, and now thanks to the efforts of scientists from the Technion in Haifa, it also exists on a silicone chip the size of a grain of sugar. Daniel Campos takes a magnified look.
So far, it's only a decorative good luck charm, but it has made headlines around the world. One of the first 2 copies of the smallest Bible in the world was presented by the former president of Israel, Shimon Peres, to Pope Benedict XVI during his visit to Israel in 2009. And then there was Nano, the smallest Bible in the world. The term nano derives from the Greek word nanos, meaning dwarf. Conceived of and created by Professor Uri Sivan and Dr. Oad Zohar of the Russell Berry Nanotechnology Institute at the Technion Israel Institute of Technology in Haifa. A square chip with each side measuring 4.76 millimeters, the size of a grain of sugar. Each silicon wafer chip contains all 27 books of the New Testament. The letters are each 18 millionth of a meter wide and can only be read with a microscope. It is the size of an olive compared with the entire planet Earth. But what is it good for? According to creators, it can be applied to infinite possibilities in the jewelry industry. But is the concept too commercial? Has it been created to fulfill the needs of superstitious religious people? Does it lack of aura? And besides Jews and Christians, will Muslims want their own mini Quran? And will Buddhists want their very own tiny Bhagavad Gita? This represents the technological evolution of the Hebrew Bible from antiquity to the postmodern era. The Nano Bible exhibition is a fascinating convergence of history, culture, and cutting-edge science where the land of the Bible meets the startup nation.
That's it for our special edition here at the Israel Museum celebrating its 50th anniversary. Tomorrow we'll be back in Jaffa, back in our studios. You're welcome to join us as always.